Okay, this is a summary of what I said on Thursday night for those who've asked for it. Some of you, of course, weren't there, so that's part of the reason I'm giving it. Okay, first thing was about John Stuart Mill and utilitarianism. Mill is essentially a second-generation utilitarian, and he's trying to answer the objections that were raised to Bentham's pure utilitarianism. And by that I mean, he says, look, people have said utilitarianism has no interest in justice. Utilitarianism has no certain predictive power. That is to say, you can calculate and take action that you think is going to be moral and then discover afterward that it's not. And then lastly, he's trying to answer the challenge that utilitarianism and its emphasis on pleasure dehumanizes people. They become more animalistic or something like that. All right, let's answer the objections going backwards. Number one, pleasure, the dehumanizing effect of pleasure. Mill points out that there's more than one kind of pleasure in the world. In fact, he groups them into two kinds of pleasures, higher and lower. Of the higher pleasures, he says those are pleasures that human beings have that other animals don't have. And only someone who has actually experienced both pleasures, the higher pleasure and the lower pleasure, is competent to judge the superiority of the pleasures. And that persons who have had both kinds of pleasures judge the human pleasures, the intellectual pleasures, the kinds of things that he's wanting to defend. They say that that's best. And therefore, he's not worried. He doesn't feel like this objection against utilitarianism is all that important. The second thing he tries to answer, the question of the predictive power of utilitarianism, he suggests a principle that is referred to by later utilitarians as rule utilitarianism. The idea that, if you concoct a rule that seems to, in general, create more happiness than unhappiness, as a rule creates more pleasure and minimizes misery, then that's the sort of thing you ought to do. You just follow the rule. The problem, of course, is that sometimes following the rule violates the principle of utility. You may find that there is a time where it will actually create more pleasure than pain to tell a lie, even though in general it might be the case that telling the truth creates more pleasure than pain. So, with that being the case, we find that the rule utilitarianism is internally contradictory and so must be guarded. The other thing was the idea that there is no justice. And to answer that question, he proposes what he calls the harm principle. He says everyone should be able to do anything they want to do so long as they don't harm anybody else. Again, it's not entirely satisfactory. In general, it's a good idea, and in general, it works pretty well. But there are going to be times when hurting someone else is the only way to create the most pleasure possible. Or contrariwise, the only way to minimize pain might involve hurting someone else. And in those cases, you have the contradiction where the harm principle contradicts the central doctrine of the principle of utility. So, Mill's attempt to protect utilitarianism from these objections doesn't entirely work. Okay, now let's go on to the next thing, which was a brief discussion of the feminism of Lindemann and Carol Gilligan. Now, as I said in class, I'm much more in tune with Carol Gilligan. Gilligan's answering an actual physical study, a sociological study conducted by Lawrence Kohlberg. And Kohlberg said of surveys he did, studies he did with children of various ages from various cultures around the world, that there was a general trend from first just worrying about simple disobedience, the simple idea that you'll get punished if you don't do the right thing, to universal theories of morality. And Kohlberg points out in his study that young women don't seem to reach the same universal principles that young men do. They tend to focus instead on the caring elements of relationships. That is to say, they see that there are persons whom I ought to care about, and failing to care about them is wrong. Other persons who I would be nice to care about, it would be wonderful to care about, I just don't have time to care about them. I have to take care of mine, the people I have immediate relationships with, and as we move away. What such thinking objects to the abstractness of most of Western moral thinking. And Gilligan says that's what the feminist needs to embrace, a more concrete, more relation-based morality. And that's the unique thing about feminist ethics. Lindemann, whom we also read from the Canvas, Lindemann proposes that what feminist ethics ought to be about is watching power. That she's not interested in equality, because who do you be equal with, and why should you be equal to men? Men are no better standard than women, maybe not as good, so why should women try to be equal to men? Shouldn't women try to be equal to men? Men try to be equal to women. Proposing again and again, and the one thing you can see that's common to both of them is that there is some suggestion that the male point of view is the right point of view. And each of them is trying to answer in one way or another that that's not right, that women's point of view is just as important. What Gilligan just simply proposes that as a fact. Lindemann proposes it as something that needs to be protected, that we need to be aware of the kinds of pains and pleasures, the kinds of power misdistribution, the way that the society and the individuals within the society pressure women into lesser places of power, rob them of their opportunities to be empowered, and that the job of the feminist is to protect us, protect men from oppressing women, and protect women from being oppressed. As you can see, they're complementary points of view. I just have a preference for Gilligan's because it spells out clearly a positive ethic, whereas Lindemann seems involved in proposing a negative ethic, what we shouldn't do as opposed to what we should do. Now, as a conclusion, I tell the story of the flood. And in the flood, you're on a roof. And on that roof, you're safe and sound, and you see two children come washing down the stream. You can save one of them. You don't have the strength, you don't have the capacity to do more than one, so you save one of them. One is your child, who is a total brat, a monster, someone who has no promise, shows no signs of intellectual capacity, of talent, anything. Just a waste of time. You yourself have thought about drowning said child on many occasions. The other child is very gifted, is very talented, is the star of the community. It's the child every parent wished they had. The child is gifted in arts and in mathematics and in science and in literature. Everything that we'd all want to be able to do, this child does well. Which one should you save? Well, according to Kant, of course, it doesn't matter. According to Kant, everyone is perfectly equal. You save your child, you save somebody else's child, it doesn't matter, as long as you save the one you can save. Utilitarian, of course, is going to say, save the good child, the productive child, the child that might make a difference in the world, the child that will bring more happiness than misery into the world, as opposed to your child, which will bring more misery than happiness. And then Gilligan wants to say, no. Your child is your child. You have a unique, caring relationship with that child, and to fail in that is to fail to be moral. All right, I hope that helps. I'll get this out on Facebook and link it right away. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.